too. That's fun.
Well, hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Carey and I know that you could be doing a lot of things on your Tuesday morning, afternoon, wherever you are. And we're so glad that you're spending it with us to talk about people development. I know it's one of my favorite things to talk about, Carey. I know you're passionate about it too. And so I can't wait to learn from you today. Yes. Well, as you guys are joining, would love for you to put in the chat box, where are you joining us from? So I am actually, I live in Houston, but I'm in Dallas at our Leadr HQ today. Carey, where are you joining us from today?
From the California studios of Carey Nieuwhof Communication.
I love it.
I'm just in California for a couple of weeks, that's all. But it sounds really, really good, doesn't it?
Yeah. And a lot different. You were just telling me that the weather is a lot different from home, right?
My Nest Cam tells me that we're getting snow. So do my friends and neighbors. And anyway, yeah, it's beautiful here. We got a little bit of fog, it's tough. It's like not quite 70 degrees and a tiny bit foggy by the ocean. So I'm about an hour north of San Diego, south of LA.
Man, I'm so jealous.
It's great.
Carlsbad,
if anybody, you ever been to Carlsbad?
Oh, I have. Yes. It's beautiful.
It's gorgeous. We're right in Carlsbad Village. So everything's a 3-minute walk to breakfast, dinner. I went to the post office. I actually had a good experience yesterday. How many people have a good experience at the USPS? Nobody.
Never. No, I don't think I've ever had.
I know. It was great. I just said, I don't know how to mail anything. And they had mercy on me and they took me in and I had to mail some stuff. And it was
I love that. I love that you're just like, I don't know how to mail anything. Help me out.
It's been it's embarrassing. It's been a while, but I've had, a team and they've mailed all my stuff and suddenly I had to mail something and I'm like, I don't know that I know how to do this anymore. So anyway,
how do I do it?
They were very nice to me.
Well, I'm glad that you had a good experiance. We've got people joining us from all over. It looks like there's Jacqueline is also
Calgary.
in Southern California, Calgary. Mm-hmm. There's Anna in Houston. That's awesome.
Houston.
Sugarland. Yep.
Where are you these days? Are you in Houston? Still Houston based, or did you move?
I am. Yeah. Still live in Houston, work remotely for the Leadr team. We're hybrid. We are exploring the hybrid life. And so we've got about half of our Leadr team in Dallas, and then the rest of us are spread out across the country. So it's working really well. Our CEO is really intentional about building culture remotely and in a hybrid environment. It's not easy, but he's doing it really well. So I'm grateful. What are you seeing as far as culture and hybrid and remote? I know your whole team is remote.
It has been. Yeah. I've been leading a remote team. Actually, you could date it back to like the 90s because the churches I started leading were so small. You couldn't work out of them. Like they didn't have an internet connection. They didn't have a phone. They didn't have anything. So I worked out of my house. And then as I built a team, they were little tiny churches. We didn't have space for staff. So everybody worked out of their home. So you could say I've been leading hybrid teams since 1997.
You're a veteran at hybrid teams.
I'm a veteran. Yeah, that's right.
I think that makes you an expert.
Yeah. Well, I made all the mistakes. So we'll talk about that. And definitely we're going to have some time for Q&A as well, right? So if people have questions about a hybrid, man, there's a lot of stuff going on there. So, and I've made some mistakes, but it's also really possible to have some great culture. Culture is not dependent on you being in the building. Because if it was, The Office never would have been the show that it was. One of the things that The Office is about is culture, right? And and it had a lot of traction because everybody had a boring job in some kind of office building. So we think often, it's very tempting to look back on 2019 and earlier as the good old days when everything was simple in leadership and with teams. But we know that's not true. There were cultural problems and everything got amplified over the last few years. So we're going to talk about that and a bunch of other stuff today.
So good, Carey. And I'm just so grateful when I reached out to you about this topic. I mean, I know we're seeing the Great Resignation all over at Leadr. We help churches and businesses and education institutions with their culture, with people development. How do they develop and care for the people that are on their team? And a big pain point we're seeing is lots of turnover right now, lots of concern. Even teams that aren't experiencing the turnover yet, they're concerned about it because they're hearing about it. And so we're coining this as the Great Resolution as we go into 22. Like, how do we how do we say, okay, acknowledge that the Great Resignation is here, and the experts are saying it's going to be with us for the next 12 months or so, but resolving to say we're going to have better care and development of our people while we have them on our team. So what are you seeing across the board, Carey?
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing a lot of anger, a lot of people who are frustrated. I'm seeing that. It was funny. I was thinking about that. It was about a year ago on my leadership podcast that the first inkling that 2021 might be a great resignation. We didn't use that term, but it was our friend, our mutual friend, your former colleague, William Vanderbloemen, who said it'll be the year of turnover. And I said, you're right. And his argument was that there was pent up slack in the system. Like when unemployment went through the roof in March, April, May of 2020, nobody quit their job. If you had a job, you were so lucky. The dust hadn't settled. And then William came on my podcast. It was the first time I really heard anyone say, yeah, and probably 2021, there'll be a lot of turnover. But I thought, okay, there's a 10-point blip or something like that. And then by the spring, they were calling it the Great Resignation, because I think a couple of things happened. On the one hand, there were a lot of people resigning their jobs. They realized, oh, online is a thing and the virtual world is a thing. But then there was the Great Migration, right? Where people left New York, people left LA. Basically, Silicon Valley moved to Miami, moved to Houston, moved to Austin, and moved to Dallas. Like people went to Texas, people went to Florida, people went into the wilderness, people moved to Tennessee. And it was like, oh, all of a sudden I can work from anywhere. So that light went on and that created a whole lot of options. And when some people were moving, they're like, okay, my company won't do remote, but there's a lot of companies that will. So it was like 4 or 5 different factors that all came together. And of course, in the first days of the pandemic 2 years ago, everybody's working out of closets and hallways and spare bedrooms. And then, you look at the spike in lumber prices, people who stayed in their homes, bought new homes or built homes are like, no, we're going to build in hybrid space into our house. So I did my backyard this year, this past summer. And one of the things, we built a pavilion and I had outlets installed in all 4 columns of the pavilion. It's a 16 by 14 outdoor structure because, and I've hosted a few venues there now. I knew that I was going to work from there. I was going to fly in leaders and they were going to work from my backyard. We were going to do cohorts there, et cetera, et cetera. So, it's just, and now we're all sitting here going, wow, what is going on? And yesterday I posted on this over at my website, CareyNieuwhof.com. And if you just scroll through the comments, there's a lot of anger and people are not putting up with toxic culture anymore. They're tired of leaders who are driving them. And so I think this is a lot of turbulence right now. And what will happen is that organizations that don't change are going to find it harder and harder to attract staff.
Absolutely.
And then, we don't, oh man, we got a lot of content to cover, but we want to take your questions too. We definitely want to take your questions. We know a lot of you are from the church space. Some of you are from the business space. And we want to hear what's happening with you. In fact, if you've got like a pain point right now, why don't you type that into the chat? It would be good just to kind of even establish now, what is your biggest concern? Is it we don't have enough people? We don't have the right people? Our people are exhausted? Like, what is that? Start priming the pump in the chat right now, and we'll keep an eye on that. It's good to see people from all over North America. I saw Canada. There's probably some other countries as well. I think if we go through everything, lack of candidates applying for open position. There's one, and don't have enough staff. Staff are getting burnt out. I wrote about that yesterday, what nobody is talking about with the Great Resignation. Everyone's talking about who's leaving, but nobody's really talking about who's staying, right? And so you've got, let's say you have a team of 10, you got 8 people left, but now 8 people are doing the work of 10 or 6 people are doing the work of 10 and the leaders are stressed out. So, wow, look at this. People don't want to do the work most needed, and they also don't want to interact with clients. Isn't that interesting? That's another thing. How much do you do virtually? How much do you do in person? Okay, we got a lot of pain points here. So I'm going to address some big trends in the talk, and then we're going to we're only going to do that about 30 minutes or so. You and I'll bounce back and forth, and then we're going to open it wide to everybody's questions. Don't have the right people, right positions. Which one's more important? Wow. There's a lot here. Turnover, the strain on people. Thank you so much. Type in your pain points if you're just joining us, and we're going to have a robust conversation in our hour together today.
We are. And Carey, let's do some quick intros. I'm sure everybody knows who you are, but just so that
no, I don't think so.
Join from the Leadr side or the Carey Nieuwhof tribe. So I'm Holly Tate. I'm the SVP of Growth here at Leadr, and we're a people development software company. So our goal is to help leaders engage and grow their team. So that's why this topic is super important to us here at Leadr. I've spent the last 10 years thinking about leadership development within organizations. How do we build the best teams? And just honored to do that as a part of the Leadr team here. We serve about 500 customers. We just launched about 18 months ago. So it has just been a wonderful adventure. Thanks. It's clearly a pain point, right, Carey? I mean, speaking of pain points, like the people development, how do we attract the right people and care for and develop them while they're on our teams? It's a big need. And so we're just honored to help. Mm-hmm. And then Carey, I've just had the joy of knowing you for, it's probably been almost 10 years.
I think the first time we met was at Orange about a decade ago.
Yes.
I remember where it was. Mm-hmm.
Was it at our photo booth? Was it at the photo booth we had there?
It was at the photo booth. That's right. It was at the photo booth. I remember.
That was fun.
Yeah.
Well, Carey, you'll introduce yourself and tell everybody about you.
Sure. So my name's Carey. I was first a lawyer, then switched into ministry, led a church for 20 years, passed that off a few years ago. And these days, I spend all of my days doing things like this. So I write books, I host a leadership podcast, we host a website, and we're privileged to be able to serve millions of leaders a year in what we do. So I have a small team and we work remotely, so we can talk all about remote work. We did long before the pandemic. It's just like one of my friends / mentors is Brian and Shannon Miles. And so I learned a ton about building virtual companies from Brian and Shannon as they built Belay. And so I'm like, I'm not going to have an office. We're just going to do this. And that allows you to, it gives you a lot of advantages, I think, particularly in this economy. So anyway, that's what I do these days. I love it. I see it as a calling. I see it as a second charge on the ministry season of my life. And we serve both business leaders and church leaders. So I like to think of it as we try to bring the best of the church world to the business community and the best of the business world to the church world. So that's what we do.
Well, and we've partnered on quite a few things already together between Leadr and the Carey Nieuwhof team. And this month, for everybody that signs up for Leadr in the next month, they get your Lead a Better Team course for free. And so that's been a really awesome fun promo that we've been able to do. This course is amazing. I've gotten to see the back end of it, of how to lead a one-on-one meeting, how to interview effectively. All of the things that go into leading a better team are all there in this course. So if you want to learn more about that, feel free to put that in the chat or reach out to me directly. Happy to share more. And with that, Carey, I will let you take over the slides. You've got
all right. So we're going to,
I'll stop sharing.
We're going to see if we can do this. Here we go. And then I'll start sharing over here.
You have some incredible stats here that are really powerful.
Well, I did a little bit of research getting ready for today, but we're going to share for about 30 minutes and then we're going to throw it open for questions. Thank you for leaving meaningful chats. Nothing worse than trivial chats in my view. But in September 2021 alone, a record 4.3 million US workers voluntarily quit their job. I know a lot of people said, turnover is normal. It's like, no, almost every economist, everything I've read, and it's been widely covered by a variety of sources, would say we're in a very abnormal moment in history. And if you joined us a little bit late, we've got the Great Resignation, but we've also had the Great Migration, where everybody moved, right? And people are depopulating cities, and California has moved to Texas and Florida, and Miami has become a startup hub. If you follow anything in crypto or Web3, Miami and Austin are kind of hotspots for that, as well as Silicon Valley. And so everybody's relocating, and we realize, and this has got huge implications for church leaders, but also business leaders, that the internet is not going away anytime soon. And suddenly, with the advent of 5G and really good internet access almost anywhere, you can work. And there are now some major employers who have just decided, no, we're going to be a hybrid company moving forward. So, and ironically, the tech companies were the late adopters on that, because they used to insist like Nona Jones, who I know we both know, yes. She works at Facebook. Prior to the pandemic, she was the only employee out of, thousands at Facebook who was allowed to work remotely.
Isn't that
and everybody
wild
else
to
had to be
think
in the
about?
office. Yeah. And now they're like, oh, maybe we could do remote work. So anyway, there's a lot changing right now. And then look at this as well. 80% of CEOs are offering increased working from home options to retain and attract talent. This is what the tech companies, Google has done this. Actually, yesterday, Jack Dorsey just announced he was stepping down at Twitter, but I think Twitter has also done this as well, where CEOs are going, okay, we've got to retain and attract talent. And even post-pandemic, if I invite everybody back into the office tower, everybody back into the building, it just greatly constrains that. And well, tell us about the Leadr team. You guys are a hybrid team, right?
We are. Yep. So we've got our team we're almost 60, about 60 right now. We'll be probably at about 100. I know, it's wild. We'll probably be at about 100 in the next
18 months.
Yes, it is. It's so much fun, but lots of
so we should talk about that.
Preach. Yeah.
Well, because one of the things that came up, Holly, was it's really hard to attract good candidates. So clearly, if you've grown to 60 people, soon 100 in 18 months, you have candidates. And I have a tiny team, so there's 8 of us. I'm not claiming, but that for most people don't have staffs of 100 or 200. And the nice thing about the internet, we can serve another million leaders. It's not going to require another 100 people. It's not. It just scales in a way that analog doesn't, right? You don't have to add square footage. You don't have to add overhead, that kind of thing. It creates some complexities. But we've had 2 open positions in the last year. We have had, let me get this right, 500 applicants for 2 positions. Now, some of that is remote work. Some of that is I can pick, like, I'm in California right now. We just brought someone on board from Colorado Springs. I have staff in Toronto, Hamilton, New Jersey, Memphis. There was someone in Omaha. We try to keep the time zones a little bit tight, but you can hire from anywhere. And then if you have a healthy culture, right? That's another big thing I want to talk about today. If your culture is healthy, if you're not burning people out, if you care for the whole person, you can create the kind of attractive environment where people actually want to work.
Yes.
And that's a big problem. And, we haven't got probably a whole lot of retail people on board, but I've been shocked. It's a bigger issue in the US than in Canada. I've been in Boston. Where else have I been in the last month and a half? Boston, Chicago, O'Hare. All the businesses are shutting down at 7 o'clock because they don't have enough staff in the airport. I'm like, I've been through airports my whole life. It's Nashville, and even here in SoCal, people closing for days or closing early because they can't get staff. It's a major issue. Hotels are cutting back service, closing wings. They can't get staff.
Well, Carey, the stat that you have up here is so important because I think, well, I know because I surveyed our Generation Z on our team, because we have quite a bit of our team are Gen Zs, which that's a whole nother, I could do a whole webinar on an experience I had this summer where I realized I'm not the young one anymore on our team. But
it's such a sad day, isn't it, Holly? I remember that day.
Yeah. But they're demanding remote work and flexibility. And so I think part of the problem is if you have a mentality that's a butts and seats mentality of you don't get work unless you're in the office, then you're going to really struggle to find the right people because Generation Z disagrees.
Yeah. And I can't trust you unless I can see you. It's like, there's a lie right there. Okay. So we got 80% of CEOs doing that. 68% are increasing their emphasis on corporate purpose, which I'm really encouraged to see. Talking to Adam Grant and some other leaders on my leadership podcast. I have Francesca Gino coming up. I have an interview with her tomorrow. More and more professors, researchers are saying for this next generation, for Gen Z in particular and younger millennials, they don't want to work for the bottom line. They don't want to work for butts and seats. They want to work for life change. They want their life to mean something. And, right now, the mission of our company is to help people thrive in life and leadership. And we share stories, comments, emails we get from leaders around the world every day, pretty much on our Slack channel. And in between, it's like, look at the difference you guys are making. I'm not making the difference. Sure, my face is up in the company or whatever. I might do the interviews, but we as a team are making a difference. And I think that is going to be important. It's as Jeff Henderson would say, you're no longer aiming to be the best business in the world. You're trying to be the best business for the world. And I think that's a huge distinction.
It really is.
So that's happening. Look at this. Jobs are not in short supply. Amazing staff are. And we've seen that already.
This, Carey. Yes, this is so good. It's not a job shortage problem. It's the right people problem.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I interviewed a couple of restaurateurs and had a conversation. There's a really nice restaurant here in Carlsbad where I'm staying. And we've been there a couple of times, had a long conversation with one of the staff. And I said, you guys are not having a talent problem here. What's going on? And same with these restaurateurs at home I interviewed before we flew out here. They'll be on my show in February, I think, of next year. And you know what they're saying is they like really orient their employees. The woman I was talking to Monday night said that her first 3 days was they went into the kitchen, looked at how all the food was made. They sampled everything on the menu. They went over the whole bar list and everything like that and met with the owners. And then after days of that kind of orientation, they released them on the floor. So when you ask the staff, like, what's good here? And this wasn't like a crazy expensive restaurant, but it was a really nice restaurant. Like, okay, tell me, because my wife's dairy free, like they give you intelligent answers rather than, oh, let me go ask the kitchen or, you know, other problems like what's the other one? Oh, this is really popular. It's like, no, I don't want to know what's really popular. I want to know what's in this dish. And they know. Yeah. And she said, that's why I love it here, because I feel like an owner.
Yes.
And she's a server making, you know, $15 an hour plus tips or whatever. So a lot of that is on us as employers. It really is. Understanding the trends, particularly among Gen Z and millennials you want to attract, will give you an edge. Because if you think about that, right, you mentioned you're not the young person on staff anymore. I remember when that happened. 80-year-olds still think I'm young, so I'm very encouraged by that. But, you know, millennials turn 40 this year.
Yep. It is real. It is real. Yep. And it's a very different, even I think a lot of people are still lumping, like if we're still having conversations about how to lead millennials, we are way too late. Like the ship has passed because we're already in figuring out the leadership thing where we're now figuring out how in the world do I develop and care for the Generation Z on my team. So I think a lot of, well, it's official, I think, right? Like the 46% of the workplace is now Generation Z plus millennials together. So it's about 50-50. That generation gap is very real. And, but we have to treat Generation Z and millennials a bit differently because we grew up differently. And there's some big nuances between the two.
The expectations are huge among millennials and Gen Z. And we'll talk about that. Actually, let's look at trend number one, which is your future staff will expect you to work for them. So I just want to say, I think these trends are true of all employers. They're true if you have 100% in-person staff. They're true if you have a hybrid staff, or if you lead a remote company like me. But if you're dealing with anybody under 40, these expectations are true. And I don't know statistically what percentage of the workforce that is, Holly, but it's got to be a huge percentage of the workforce is under 40 now. And so I started noticing this over a decade ago as I was hiring 23-year-olds right out of college. And I realized, okay, these guys have options. They grew up with the internet. They know that they can work somewhere else if it doesn't work out. So I thought, I've got to start working for them and stop thinking that they are working for me. So most young leaders have subconsciously realized they have to create a life plan that's independent of any employer or organization. You know, my grandfather worked for one company for a while and got a gold watch. My dad worked in one industry for his whole life. And I've been a lawyer and a pastor and a podcaster and an author. And I was in radio back in the day. Like I've had 5 or 6 different careers. And I think that's pretty normal now, Holly.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing is, even though millennials and Gen Z both grew up in the internet age, right? I'm a millennial and I remember when we got our first computer, whereas Generation Z, they grew up with YouTube. Like I remember when YouTube first began. And so I think what we have to really, what you have here is so important in that Generation Z views the workplace as they can go to YouTube and figure out how to do anything. So it's not a place where they can learn a skill anymore. It's how will they be developed and mentored as a person? Because all of the skills and courses and content and classes, that's all accessible online. They can pivot their careers at any time if it has to do with skill set. So when I've surveyed the Generation Z on my team and I asked, what would keep you around for 3+ years? What do you look for in an ideal workplace or an ideal manager? It's all about the growth and development as a person that they'll receive at the workplace. And so it's really important that we as leaders take ownership of that and realize that's our responsibility to help develop them.
I've got a whole session. You mentioned Lead a Better Team, which we're giving away if people sign up for Leaders today. For the Leadr software. I actually teach that because I had to learn that the hard way. Well, first of all, there's no downside. If you're developing the whole person, how is that a bad thing? I mean, it's very consistent with what I believe about faith and God and Christ. And I want people, there's a guy who transitioned off our team this summer who's working for a church right now. And I texted him the other day and I'm like, hey, come on up to our place and hang out with Tony and I this summer. Like, that's a former employee. And if you have a zero-sum game mentality, that is not happening, but we're friends. No, it's not. And so I'm like a fan of his for life. The fact that he doesn't work with me right now is fine. It's great. He felt more called to just the church side, which is awesome, but we're still friends and that works well. So the strategy I would suggest here, and I've got strategy tips and we'll move maybe fairly quickly through this so we can get to questions. Yeah, but if you help them win, if you help your team win, you'll both win. Like, I'm going to win if my team wins. And if you merely want them to help you win, you'll lose. So the old hierarchy, like, here I am at the top and I'm the boss and you all serve me, all you minions, that's gone. And the goal now, you can use it as an inverted pyramid or a circle or whatever, metaphor you want. But I basically, I try never to say these people work for me. I say, I get to work with Anita, with Sam, with Lauren, with Joe. I get to work with them. I'm working with them. They're not working for me. And so I think that sounds small, but it's huge. And again, read the comments on my blog when I write about the Great Resignation. Read the comments on social media. People are very angry and fed up with employers who take that top down, you're lucky to have a job, you work for me attitude. So think of yourself as working for them. Trend number 2, your staff will show you diminished loyalty. Now, I know this one sounds depressing, but it's true because they see themselves as their own brand. Technology, as you pointed out, Holly, has made it easy to find new jobs, interview at new places, determine salary ranges, right? How much should I be making? That's not under the veil anymore. Like before, it's like, should I ask Holly how much she's making? I don't know whether I should. That's kind of personal. Well, now it's like you just Google, what's the salary for an EA who lives in this community? And you get reasonable answers. And anyway, they can compare benefits and show every team member. This shows every team member. They got options. It's like, look, if you don't treat me well, Holly, I'm going to walk and I can go somewhere else. And that's kind of what happened this year.
And they're going to post it on the internet, on Glassdoor, on a Facebook review of your company. So yeah, I mean, the stakes are a lot higher for how you treat people while they're there and on the way out.
Yeah, I've talked to some leaders who are like, please don't look at my Glassdoor reviews. I'm embarrassed. And right, we used to have that behind closed doors and the leader who's sort of the tyrant. And all of a sudden, people are just going public with that stuff. And I shudder to think as a younger leader, if we had Glassdoor, what would have happened? But hopefully I paid the stupid tax and I've learned a few things over the years. And, but that's, again, like that former staff member, keeping a great relationship with them. Yes. And we text all the time and like, he's welcome at my house, which is great. Most employees today realize if it doesn't work out with you, they have 100 other options at their fingertip, or they'll start something themselves. Now, you might go as a leader and say, well, I know 8 out of 10 churches fail, 8 out of 10 businesses fail in the first 5 years. True, they do. But that's not going to stop them from leaving and trying. And then you've lost that team member. So the strategy is to commit to developing them as people, not just team members. Any thoughts on that, Holly, before we move on to the third trend?
I mean, I just want to say preach, because this is what I'm seeing as well. This was one of the biggest things I learned when I surveyed the Generation Z on our team was they're specifically looking for, one of the phrases was for you to go deep with me, not just wide. This generation is the most connected, but isolated at the same time. They feel very lonely, even though they've connected with everybody that they've ever went to high school with on social media. And so they're looking for leaders who are pouring into them that they can respect and look up to as a mentor and not just as a boss, or how do you squeeze the most out of me from a performance standpoint. we're finding that the performance is a lagging indicator of the leading indicator, which is, are you caring and developing for your team? Performance comes out of that. So yeah, totally agree with you here.
Man, well, I certainly feel that. And John Maxwell has one of my favorite books he's written is called The 5 Levels of Leadership. And level 4 is people development. This idea that people are better off for having worked for you. That's one of my exit, not everybody stays forever, but that's one of my exit interview questions is, are you better off, or how are you better off having worked with me or worked with us over the years? And developing them as people, for those of you who are in the ministry space, who are church leaders, we should be professionals at this. Like, we're not, but this should not be a stretch. It shouldn't be what you can get out of your team, but how you can build into them. And I think that's a major factor. Okay, the third trend I'm watching is that healthy cultures will attract, anemic or toxic cultures will send people packing. Probably a year ago, 2 years ago, I would have just left it as toxic cultures, but I think there's a new cultural problem that we're facing in the church and in a lot of businesses, which is kind of this anemic culture. We are holding on, but barely. We're on life support. So it's not toxic. It's not like, the boss is abusive and people are so angry and they're making me work 120 hours a week and I feel like I'm going to die, or there's gossip everywhere. It's just flat and boring and lifeless. The way you treat people in the future may be just as important as what you pay them. Any thoughts about compensation? We're going to talk about that in a minute because I think it's important. But
yeah, well, the point you made earlier was so true that compensation isn't hidden anymore. It's easy to go online. And so you've got to be competitive, but it's not the sole driver. So it's a component, but it's purpose plus compensation. Those go hand in hand these days is what I'm seeing.
I've heard from so many leaders over the last year who said, I took a pay cut, but I'm so much happier.
Yes.
That they will work for less if they're treated better. And that's not an excuse for you to cut everyone's pay because you're treating them better. I'll get into that in a minute. Yeah. But, $100,000 is not going to solve a problem. No salary is big enough to compensate for making you feel miserable. No. So, if it was like $200,000 a year and you're working 100 hours a week and you hate your boss, you hate your coworkers, and you never see your family, are you in? Most leaders today would be like, no. And I think a previous generation would have said, well, I'll sacrifice now so I can retire later. And this generation is going out of here. Sorry, I will become a minimalist and live on less. Great cultures will keep great people, and toxic cultures will expel them. And again, I teach this in Lead a Better Team. So if you've taken the course or you're going to take it as a result of connecting with Leadr today, I've got a whole section on culture because I think it's so important. And we pay a lot of attention to culture in our company, and we can talk about that later. So the strategy there is develop and improve your culture. Number 4, talent density. Stunning coworkers will be a huge draw. Some of these ideas for this section of the little presentation are from the new book by Reed Hastings and Aaron Meyer called Netflix No Rules Rules. Highly recommend it. It'll rock your world. I did an interview with Aaron, if you want the cheater 1-hour version, on my leadership podcast a few months ago. Aaron, E-R-I-N, Meyer, M-E-Y-E-R. But talent density. So this is Netflix culture. Hiring better employees is far more effective than hiring more employees. Churches tend to be overstaffed, particularly declining churches tend to be overstaffed. And mediocre or adequate staffing bring the whole team down. So there's this very controversial line at Netflix that adequate performance gets you a generous severance package, which is really, really? Ouch. So you're doing your job. You're good, but we're not going to keep you here. And there's that idea that, like imagine a baseball team. You got 9 hitters in the lineup, and there's that one guy who's like batting 132 and is always striking out. But you got 3 men on base, and now he's up to bat. And you're like, oh, you're going to put in a pinch hitter. What are you going to do? But it's this idea that it brings people down. So the strategy is to embrace the rock star principle. So this is something from engineering And the principle is a highly talented software engineer will be 10x more effective than an average software engineer. And most people, when asked about it, would say, no, I expect them to be twice as effective or, 1.5 times as effective. But this is shown in like good code and ideas that move the needle, that rock stars can be 10x. And if you think about it, there are probably in your work life, whether you worked for someone else or perhaps in your company, where when one person left, you had to replace them with 3 people. You know what we're talking about?
Yeah.
And if you really hire a rock star, it would be like, crap, now I got to create a whole department. Yeah. And so the idea is talent density. And what happens, I found this, I'm not a musician, but having led a church for 20 years, as our music got better and better, the great musicians didn't want to play with a drummer who wouldn't keep time. So that average, it's like, listen, I play the bass and I'm a good bass player, but I'm not playing with that drummer. So we had to elevate the whole band, because if there's one person who can't keep time, always has the wrong notes, doesn't know the lyrics, the rest of the team wants to quit. On the other hand, that incredible drummer who used to tour professionally can lift everybody else up. So there are those principles at work. So the strategy is release your mediocre staff. Adequate performance gets you a generous severance package. Yeah. And that's pretty risky. Like, I don't know. What do you think about this? This is pretty controversial. It's gotten a lot of pushback. Any thoughts on that, Holly?
Well, before I was at Leadr, I had, I was in recruiting specifically for churches and Christian organizations. Then I started my own consulting firm. The reason why I paused that company to join Leadr is because of the high capacity people on this team. And so when people have a recruiting issue, I often say, well, let's look at the talent on your team, because great talent attracts great talent. And so high capacity people are looking for, it's what you said I think it was in point number 2, but it goes with this one well, which is, if they don't feel like they're growing or being challenged by the people on the team that they're a part of, they're going to go do something themselves. Or you can convince them to come join your team if they see that they're going to be better because they were on your team. And that's why I joined Leadr, because I knew that being at the table with these amazing people who are pouring into our mission to develop 1 million leaders through people development software are just incredible people that I want to be around, because they're going to make me better. So great talent attracts great talent.
Preach. Okay, that's great. It's hard to leave for a mediocre team. Now think about this, right? For your next move, it would be hard to leave for a mediocre team when you're paid well to be on a highly gifted team with top talent making a big impact. Like that becomes, now part of the rockstar principle, I didn't put it in a slide, is that you have to pay near top of scale, because everything is so transparent. And I remember asking Erin, well, what about for church leaders who are on a very small budget? She said, if they're truly 10x what an average employee is, you can afford them to pay 50%. You can afford to pay them 50% more. So the idea is it's better to have a team of 3 rock stars than 10 average mediocre staff. And often, here's a secret, we can debate this in the Q&A, churches hire out of charity. Churches are like, I feel so sorry for this person, so I'll just hire them because they can't get a job anywhere else. It's like, okay, well, if you want to do charity, that's one thing, but you're never going to build a winning organization. Like call that charity then, and just give that person some money and help them get back on their feet. But why bring them on your team? Okay, 5th trend, then we'll open it up. Perfect. Young leaders will show up ready to fuel your mission. They're going to show up ready to fuel your mission. So leaders who want to preserve the institution, pad the bottom line, or simply grow the organization will always struggle to attract and keep young leaders. More of the same is not a compelling vision. And I'm realizing this. The young leaders on my team are really pushing me to go above and beyond. Like they want to make a dent in the universe and change the world. So the best way to attract and keep young leaders is to work with them to accomplish a greater purpose. So one of the things that has to happen for those of us, I'm barely Gen X. So I'm like, according to most studies, the first year of Gen X. My kids call me a boomer, but that's fine. Anyway, the old model was that the leader goes away on retreat, hears from God, comes back, imposes the vision. The new model, which I've been working toward collaboratively over the last 15 years, is no, you get some people in the room. You have a clear sense as the leader where you want this to go and where you think God wants it to go, but you involve other people. So our team helped craft our values. Our team helped craft our mission. Our team, we just spent 2 days together in New England last month, crafting out all of 2022 together. I don't come down from the mountain and pontificate. I involve you, because involvement fuels engagement, and engagement fuels ownership, and they own it. Thoughts on that, Holly?
Oh man, I'm just writing in the chat what you just said. Involvement drives engagement, and engagement drives ownership. That is gold, Carey. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I need to find the graphics. There was a study that a consulting organization had done, but essentially it was the fact that, and this is where I think is a big difference between millennials and Generation Z. So millennials, we expected to be involved in the decision, but I still think because we were following our Boomer and Gen X leaders, we didn't expect to make the final decision. We realized, okay, there's the boss, above me, right? There's still a sense of hierarchy there. What I'm seeing and what a lot of the data is saying is that Generation Z expects not only to be involved, but they expect to make the decision. So it's what I'm calling a collaborative decision-making process. It's like empowered collaboration. So they view the leader on the outside that's a guide and a mentor to guide them to the decision. It's a very different leadership philosophy and expectation than the hierarchical of, at the end of the day, the boss makes the decision. And so I think that's really critical for us to attract and retain young leaders. Is, again, it's all about mentoring and guidance rather than authoritative, leadership, I guess.
And I want to get to the questions, but I just want to add to what you said. You're totally right. And it's a growth bottleneck. So what happens is if all the decisions flow to you as the senior leader, first of all, you're not going to make the best decisions because you're not an expert. You're not even close enough to what's happening. Secondly, it creates time delays. It can create decision paralysis. And what I had to learn when our church was stuck under the 1,000 barrier over a decade ago for longer than it needed to be, was I was in the leadership team were the bottleneck. So I moved to push down decision-making. If you're the leader, you're responsible. Here are 3 conditions in which you can't make the decision, but 99% of the time you can make the decision. And that opened up decision-making. And now, Netflix talks about that no rules, rules too. But, people at the lower level of the organization are signing off on multi-million-dollar decisions. And you'd say, well, that's so risky. It's like, no, but it fuels responsibility and ownership and engagement and all of those things. So, leaders, let go. If you want to grow, you got to let go. If the mission isn't bigger than you, you need a new mission. So if the mission is just, it's about me and my ego or my church or my thing or my bottom line or what I say, you need a new mission. Because first of all, for church leaders, that was never the church. Like, get over it. I don't know what you're leading, but that's not a church. And secondly, it's very uninspiring. Thank goodness this new generation is calling everything out, because we need to call it out. So anyway, those are a few thoughts to get us started. I think we got a few. We would love to take your questions in our remaining time, but we got some opportunity here today too for leaders, Holly.
That's right. Yep. So if you have not yet, I know we've got quite a few Leadr customers joining today's webinar, but if you have not yet checked out Leadr, we'd love to show you a demo. And if you sign up for Leadr in the next month, we will provide Carey's course, Lead a Better Team, where he unpacks all of this. This has been such an awesome 45 minutes so far. I can't imagine a whole course. It's just like a little crash course MBA there about leading a team. So feel free to check that out. You can go to our website, leadr.com, to request a demo and learn more about that. But yeah, Carey, let's jump into Q&A. I'll read you some questions if that's okay, and get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, let's go. Oh, I can stop sharing too. Ta-da.
Perfect.
Now it's just us.
There we go. All right. So Trey said, let me scroll back down here. Okay. Trey Bailey. Trey says, our staff is getting older, and that means a little more top heavy salary wise, but we need to add some younger folks, especially for new ideas, relevance, and energy. What would your advice be? What do you think, Carey?
Oh, that's a hard one. So some of that can be, if they're particularly older in their 50s, why are they staying on? Do they still have a red hot passion, white hot passion? Are they still really engaged? Because often what happens, particularly in the not-for-profit or the church world, is that we will confuse a financial issue with an employment issue. So what happens is, Carey needs to stay on for 5 more years so he can afford to retire. Well, first of all, how do you think I'm going to lead if I'm staying on 5 more years, just collect a paycheck so I can afford to retire, right? And yet that's a very real issue, particularly in churches where we care about people. So what I would do is go to your board, go to those team members, to your senior leadership team, and then eventually to your board and have an open conversation about, the role that those senior staff are playing. This is a major issue for millennial senior pastors who are taking over from boomer pastors. So, the 60-year-old leaves, and there are now a whole bunch of 50-somethings, and I'm a 50-something, so I'm speaking, from that generation in senior leadership. And the 38-year-old millennial senior pastor comes in and goes, what do I do with all these 50-year-olds who have fatter salaries and honestly aren't carrying the weight and really aren't part of the future? See that as a generous compensation issue, because if you were to pay them out, now it's going to cost you a little bit of money now, but you multiply 5 salaries times 5 years or 10 years, and you think about how much that is, it is way better to deal with the problem early. Now, if they're energetic, if they're contributing, if they're part of the future, that's a very different thing. But I would, the mistake most people make is that they confuse an employment issue with a compensation issue. So if it's really all about money, deal with it at the money level. And then again, you want to, if you follow the rock star principle, maybe you're paying your 25-year-old who will not command a 50-year-old salary, but maybe your 25-year-old then can make 20% more than most 25-year-olds, which is like, hugely advantageous to them. But if they're producing at 2 or 3x, 10x the rate, that's more than justifiable. And you're saving a little bit of money over that 55-year-old.
That's so good. And the only thing I would add to that, Carey, would just be, it would be an expectation of me, if I'm leading this team, to see the fruit from a development perspective. How are those 50-somethings that are at that higher salary, how are they developing the team underneath them to be able to take over when they do retire? That would be a clear goal and outcome that I would expect of those higher salaries, that they start building that leadership pipeline so that you can have that younger staff member that's contributing and ready to take over when it's time. So definitely write that into the job description and their goals if it's not there yet, Trey, for sure. All right. I really like this question. Let's see. Lots of great questions coming in. Let me scroll back and find it. It was the question on you said when you pushed authority down through the organization at your church, Carey, you gave them like guardrails. It was 3 things. These are kind of your guardrails for making decisions. And someone asked, can you give an example of what those were in a time where someone didn't make the right decision in those? So I guess the question would be, how did you really have that accountability and guardrails? Because we got another question about accountability from a remote working standpoint earlier. And I think that this answer could help in both of those.
Let me give you all 3. So one is it consistent with our mission, vision, and strategy? In other words, is it part of what we're already doing? If the answer is yes, go ahead and make the decision. I don't care. Number 2, is it within your allocated budget for the year? So let's say one department is $10,000 for the year. The youth group leader wants to spend it all on pizza one night. I don't care. If it's $10,001, well, then you need to have a conversation with whoever you're reporting to about the extra dollar that you're spending. So is it consistent with our current mission, vision, and strategy? Is it within your allocated budget? And then third, does it impact other people on the team? So let's say, for example, in kids ministry, I want to introduce live music. You should probably have a conversation with the creative team about, okay, now we have more musicians spread out. It's not like you need their permission, but at some point, if it's going to have ripples beyond your area. So if the answer is yes, yes, and no, it's not going to impact any. Yep. Mission, vision. Yeah, it's within budget. Yeah, no, it's not going to impact anyone else. Go ahead and make the decision. So what happens if they make bad decisions? Well, you just deal with that every day. And if they make enough bad decisions, then you got the wrong person on the team and you deal with it that way. And what that meant is that those decisions weren't being forced to me or to the leadership team. it released it. And then with a distributed team like I have right now, you just have to have really clear metrics and an excellent system for people who are like in the weekly meetings. So I'll cut the 5 questions every great manager asks, right? So you want to ask, how are you? Is there anything I can do to help? What are you working on? What obstacles are in your way? And, how am I getting in the way of the mission? Those are things. So once you have clear metrics, and we have really good project management software in Asana, et cetera, we have clear goals that we set for the company. That keeps everybody on track. Now, what's interesting is everyone assumes that because it's remote, it's harder. But I can point to 1,000 in-person organizations that don't have clear metrics, don't have good one-on-one reportings, have no form of accountability. So what's nice about leading a remote team is it kind of forces you there early, but then you've got to apply those same standards to your in-person teams, because otherwise it's a disaster.
It's so true, Carey. You're getting me on one of my soapboxes, but this is where I think people who argue for all in-person culture, I think the reason for that is because they haven't yet named, the definition of culture is shared values and beliefs, period. A culture of a country is shared values and beliefs. A culture of a company or a church is shared values and beliefs. And so a lot of times it's like, no, it has to be in person, because that leader has not yet named and specified what those shared values or beliefs are. So in person, it's caught. We pick up on it as we're meeting, as we're interacting with each other, because we're observing it. But when you're remote, it has to be taught. And so that's where I think the disconnect comes. And teaching something takes intentionality, and it takes forethought, and being very intentional in every single meeting and every single interaction remotely, making sure that those shared values and beliefs are lived out. And so that's where I think some of the tension comes from. And what you're saying is so important, is that we name those and make sure that it's clear, which is why in our Leadr software, we have goals front and center in every one-on-one meeting that you have with a team member. Right there, front and center is their goals. So a team that's asking about performance, like not sure, it's like, well, show me their goals. Have you made that clear? Show me your values. Have you made that clear? Otherwise, there's probably just some miscommunication and missed expectations, and that will always lead disappointment.
And motivated team members want that accountability. They want to win. True. They want to know when they hit the mark, exceeded the mark, missed the mark. And then your job is to move the obstacles out of the way to help them hit the mark next time.
So good. So Carey, we've gotten a couple of questions that are in this similar vein. So, and it's related to what we were just saying. I'm curious to hear more thoughts on this. So Josh is saying, speaking of mediocrity to high capacity, if our focus is on people development, wouldn't that mean we as the organization should help these mediocre employees grow? Some people may take longer to develop, but when they do, they thrive and bloom. So do we ignore these opportunities and let people go? Or if we're keeping them, what are some indications you've seen in your experience that will help discern who has that potential to grow and who doesn't? I think we've gotten this question like 2 or 3 times already. So how do you determine if it's just time to let them go, or if they've got that growth potential, it's just going to take some more time and investment?
So Josh and others, it sounds like you're doing a culture shift. And with a culture shift, you're right. Maybe that was on you. Maybe, if you're the senior leader, you haven't led with passion and clarity, and you haven't held people accountable. But I think what you have to do is you have to put a date on the calendar. So there are some people who are always working on it. It's like, well, I didn't do very well this year, but next year will be different. And then next year, this time, there's no difference. It's just like they are not motivated people. I would say in the future, you want to hire for self-starters. We've gotten very technical in our hiring. We have a performance coach that we work with who runs people through the NEO, which is one of the most clinically verifiable psychological assessments you can do. It's like going through boot camp to get on our team. But I know, with psychological training, before I hire someone, whether they are self-starters or whether they're not. It's not like, oh, I read their strength finders and I had a good interview, because people can interview well and perform horribly. But there are ways. That's just called the NEO. You can NEO. You can find other people who do that, obviously. But I think there are ways to know moving forward whether you're hiring for somebody. And then what I would say is invest, because it's cheaper than a wrongful dismissal suit or anything down the road, but invest in some good coaching and counseling. And I would recommend a service, but it's just a one-off guy I know, and I don't want him to get totally overwhelmed. But you can find these people who are very, very good at hiring. Our guy hires for the NBA. He hires for different people. So he hires at sort of elite levels. But you can find people who will help you determine, like even with your existing staff, oh, you know what? Carey's just not a self-starter. He's kind of lazy. He's not very motivated. So you can try. And here's what you'll discover. You already know this, Josh. You've had the conversation 8 times with the employee you're thinking of. Mm-hmm. And they're always like, well, it's going to get better. And then it never gets better. So if you want to do that for the next decade, go ahead. But there's a certain point. And if you have the nice thing about having a psychological assessment like the NEO or a train, not just I went online and I found this and, here's your personality profile, but somebody who actually does this for a living, you can say, look at this, Carey. Okay, we got this. Like maybe this isn't the best fit for you. And the good news is there are jobs that want people who plod along. And you can find them. But I would say put a date on the calendar, get some professional outside help. What's your experience been with that, Holly, as far as, trying to help people who are chronic underperformers become higher performers?
Yep. So first, I think it comes with clear expectations. I think a lot of times as leaders, we think we've had the conversation those 8 times, but really it's just been in our head and we haven't actually clearly communicated to our team member what our expectations are, whether it's performance, whether it's a culture. So make sure, and that's why we here at, somebody asked, David said, what are your top 5 best practices for better develop and care for your staff? We actually have 5 foundations at Leadr that whether you use our software or duct tape and paper clips, like obviously we would love you to use our software, but even if it's a moleskin, like at the end of the day, one of our 5 foundations is that you're having regular one-on-ones with every person on your team. So as a leader, that you're meeting and having intentional one-on-ones. And in those one-on-ones, you should be giving regular feedback. You should be setting clear goals, having a personalized growth and development plan, and recognizing that person for their unique skills and strengths. So those are our 5 foundations. And if that's not happening, how in the world could that underperformer ever know what good performance looks like? And so I think it starts with us looking in the mirror and making sure we've been really, really clear about that so that we're doing our best to set them up for success. And then you nailed it. Give them a timeline. So typically like the HR term for this is a performance improvement plan, right? A PIP. But I think that it's really clear. I think you need to give, a few months of making sure that you've been very clear in those intentional one-on-ones, that it's documented. Like in our software, you can go back and look at your timeline and see, okay, what did we talk about 3 months ago in our one-on-one? And it's all there. And if it's not improving, then it's time to say, okay, now we're going to have to put you on a performance improvement plan. And if these 3 things don't change in the next 30 days, then we're going to have to let you go. And that's where they have the opportunity to rise to the occasion. Or oftentimes employees will opt out because they know they're not in their sweet spot.
Yeah.
And they're not
they get it.
Yeah. So that would be.
And a lot of them, particularly in the church world, they're trying hard. They're trying really, really hard. It's not in them. The analogy I use is if you put me in the accounting department, we're all in trouble. Now, I read the P&L. I do my banking. Like I know, okay, there's got to be money in the bank. But if you put me in charge of the Excel spreadsheets, we're all doomed. Like it's not a lack of willingness. It's just I'm in the wrong lane. 30 seconds. Can I tackle, John asked about, what about in a ministry context about calling? All right.
Yes,
so John, I'm gonna say this, and then Holly, you tell me how I'm wrong. Okay. I think it's a smoke screen. I really do. I think people hide behind this idea of God told me I need to stay. Now, I'm sure there's 1 or 2 people who've heard from God, and I'm not claiming a holier than thou attitude. But when someone is saying, well, God, I feel called to stay here, to me, that's always a red flag that someone is not willing to own their decision. And I have enough reformed background in me to say, well, I also think our calling is confirmed in the judgment of others. So when I was in law and supernaturally, way out of character, felt a call into ministry, another story for another day, I didn't believe it. I'm like, I went to my almost wife, my fiance, said, what about this? And she's like, oh, I see it. And then I went to my parents and they're like, oh yeah, I see it. And then I went to other people and they kept seeing it. And I'm like, well, I don't see it. Like I had this experience with God, and other people confirmed it. So if the person is the only person who feels called and everyone else is like, I would pay attention to everybody else, because often that's fear. Often it's a lack of emotional intelligence. I don't know. That's just having been in the church space for a long time. And I'm not cynical about it. I think people actually get called, but if no one else sees the calling, you're either an Old Testament prophet or you're hiding something.
That is good. Allison agrees. Allison says, yes, Carey, with like 5 exclamation points. So I think you
that's Allie. That's Allison from Life Church, who, by the way, has a great open door rating, which is huge. Huge. What we were talking about earlier. Thanks, Allison.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So good. So good. Well, Carey, thank you so much for taking an hour out of your morning over there in California time.
Here we are.
And I know you're close to the beach. It's probably calling your name right now. So I'm so glad that you
It is.
took time
the
to
fog is clearing.
With us.
It's nice.
So good. Well, hey, I'm going to put some
Holly,
links.
I appreciate what you are doing at Leadr. Yeah. Thank you so much. So I'll jet, but thank you so much. Okay.
Yeah. Well, care. I'm going to put a couple of links here. And so Carey Nieuwhof, if you guys are not listening to Carey's podcast, you've got to listen to it. And also, Carey, you just released a new book recently, At Your Best. So you definitely grab that. And then I'm also going to put in our Leadr link here. So check out our website, People Development Software. We can help your church or your organization better care for and develop your team. And with that, Carey, I'll say thank you again. And I hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Yeah. And thanks for featuring the Lead a Better Team course too, when people sign up for Leadr today. I put my heart and soul on team leadership. So there's some of what we talked about today and a whole lot more in that. And I really appreciate all the leaders who hung in. I know you've got a million webinars you could go to. We appreciate you coming to this one. And thank you so much.
That's right. Thanks, Carey. Bye, everybody.
Thanks.